Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's seminar. Sorry, apologize. My name is Florentina, and I am Vanessa, personal assistant here at Positive Dynamics. Today, our seminar is all about tips and traps and how to avoid ruining our retirement plan. Let's talk about Vanessa. Since 2006, Vanessa has been a driving force behind the success of Positive Dynamics, which started from a humble beginning alongside Dane. Vanessa is deeply committed in helping clients achieving their financial goals and in her true passion. Vanessa possesses a remarkable talent for simplifying intricate concepts into understandable insights that connect with audience from diverse backgrounds and level of expertise. We are now pleased to introduce you today to Vanessa, who will share her expertise and insights on tips and traps to avoid ruining your retirement plan. Let's give a welcome to Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Florentina. And how's everyone feeling tonight? Excellent. Good. Positive. That's more positive. I like that answer. And look, it's really great that you've been able to take some time out of your day to come along. And my goal is that I can share some really great value to you so you can walk away and increase your knowledge. And then perhaps you might even like to make an appointment with us after. So tonight, as Florentina said, we're going to be talking about tips and traps to avoid ruining your retirement plan. So this is kind of designed for people that are in their 50s, leading into retirement, but some of the topics we're going to talk about are going to apply no matter what age you're at. So a bit about our team and about Positive Dynamics. So we've had the business now since 2006, so 17 years in business, and we have a really great advisor team. So myself and Dane, we founded the business, as I said, and then we have some specialists. So some of the topics we're going to talk about tonight later on are going to be Centrelink but also aged care. Natalie and Justine, they're the absolute specialists in our team that look after those. So if you have a lot of questions, I would be best to direct them to both Natalie and Justine. I'll try my best to answer if you have any questions. And then we have Hardik, of course, as well. And Hardik's a specialist that sits in our investment committee. So if you want to have really engaging conversations around different investment classes, what's happening in the market at the moment, you'll find that Hardik's going to really love that conversation and have a really in-depth conversation with you. So that's a bit about the team. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about myself and in fact, a story that's going to help set the scene for what we're going to talk about tonight. So you'll see there a picture of it's myself and my husband. This is in Tasmania. And we decided we want to do a 4-day trek in the walls of Jerusalem. Has anyone been to that area of Tasmania? No? It actually sits really close to the main area that people go hiking. Someone help me. Does anyone know? No, Cradle Mountain. There it is. Cradle Mountain. It's really, really close to Cradle Mountain. And there was one of these, I think it was this mountain here that we climbed, and you could see over the Cradle Mountain. So if that gives you a bit of an idea, it's up really high. And one of the things that we were told before we actually went on the adventure, you know what, you really need professional advice. This is something you could do on your own, but things can go wrong and you really want to take professional advice. And the other thing is you really want to plan. So there are two concepts we're going to talk about quite a bit tonight, professional advice and planning. And hopefully you'll see the relevance of this story as we go through. But so, to cut a long story short, Dane and I, we engaged some guides. And in fact, there was 3 of us doing the trek and we had 3 guides, so a ratio of 1 to 1. And that worked out brilliant for us because as you can see from some of these pictures, although we went in December, it was snowing one night and a big storm came through the valley and temperatures got down really cold below 0. And I think that perhaps in the tent overnight, I may not have survived the night if I didn't engage in professional advice and have a plan in place. Yeah. So the guides actually, before we got in the bus to take off, even though they'd given us a checklist of what we needed to take, they they went through each bag individually to make sure we had what was there. That's how thorough they were, and that, I guess that's another reason that you take the profession. So we survived to tell the story. We got to climb some really nice peaks, and that is that. So, general advice warning. Everything we go through tonight is general in nature. It's not specific to your personal circumstance, but we can tailor it to your needs. We just need to organise a meeting separate to this. We can have a nice chat about it. Don't you love these transitions? My son, who I was talking about earlier, said he's 10, and he put the transitions throughout this slide. So he takes absolute credit. Clever kids. Clever.
They're very cute. So
Sorry, that's right. Okay, so let's talk about the traps. These are the traps that we've got to be careful when we're coming into retirement. And I'm just going to talk about the main ones that we see. But of course, there's probably plenty of other traps. But let's just focus on the three main areas that we see people make mistakes when they're leading into retirement. And that really is taking on too much risk or taking too little risk. So it can be one extreme to the other. And then the other one's the lack of diversification. We're going to talk about these three areas in quite detail. And then we're going to talk about the tips, the things that are really important to help make sure that we do have a really comfortable retirement. And that's, we're going to talk about planning, if you didn't already notice. We're going to talk about tax minimisation and some strategies to help you there, which will include transition to retirement. For some, they may have heard that terminology before. For others, it might be very foreign. So we're going to explain what that means. And then we're going to some people are going to be able to access Centrelink and others won't. But there is a period of time where you can almost access both. So we'll just give you some tips on what that looks like, depending on your age group. So starting with risk. When we talk about risk, I think every person that sits in front of us has a different definition of risk. So I've got a picture there of a bunch of skydivers. And then when we look at that picture, we're probably thinking, well, you could pull over the sky and die, that's a risk. You probably ask them and they would say there's no risk at all. They've got their, chute on the back, they've probably got a backup one and they probably think they're fine. Yeah. So we're going to define what risk is. I don't know, does anyone want to share their idea of risk? When you talk about risk?
Maybe, but I can't think of it right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll move on. So when we're talking about risk, we can be talking about, so this is a really great way of defining risk when we're talking about investments. So it depends what asset class we're dealing with. This depends what risk we're dealing with. And we know that the more risk that we take, the higher the potential for the return. And the lower the risk that we take, the lower the risk, the lower the return. So in that instance, we're talking about cash. That's about as safe as it gets. You've got money in a bank account. And, in today's environment, you might be earning somewhere between 3 and 5% if you've got it in a term deposits type environment, which is nice because interest rates have gone up. So that benefits people that have got cash. But it's still not a great, you can be earning much better than that, considering the inflation and also goods are sitting around that level at the moment now as well. So then if we look at the other end of the spectrum, we're talking about emerging markets. So would you agree that, we talk about emerging markets and we might be thinking Brazil or India or China, that they are a little bit more risky countries and investors? Yeah. So that's what we would say is probably the higher amount of risk that you would take. And then we move down to there and we go, okay, well, developed markets in Australian shares or international shares. So could be Australia, Europe, the US. There's still more risk, but it's less risk than emerging markets. We've got property. Property sits there. Most people generally feel more comfortable with property because you can see it and it's just something that we're all more familiar with. And then we've got other sorts of investments that are kind of bank products that give you a little bit better return than cash. So when we talk risk, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about speculating on a mining stock or a tech deposits just come out, because that would be crazy amount of risk in our opinion, because that's when you can actually lose money. So let's say there's some tech company that starts up next door. They've got the newest thing in cybersecurity. That's a big craze at the moment. And you go and invest all your money with that company because they're taking off and they're going to do really well. But there's a large amount of risk attached to that, and they could go broke overnight. We've seen it happen before. We would not touch those sorts of investments, and we'd recommend that you don't either. We're going to be dealing with good quality companies, so that we know that the risk that we take, it's just volatility we're talking about. So it's going to go up and down in value. You're never going to lose your money. So hopefully that defines risk. So that's a good spot to start with. And we can start by talking about taking too little risk. And I've got a great example for you. So this is a client's account that we had met in 2017. And all of her details are taken away, so you won't know who she is. But she's in her later part of life, so she's voluntarily in retirement, and she's got some term deposits. And she comes to us in 2017 through an introduction through her children, and she says, look, I just feel like I'm going backwards. I feel like I want to be doing better for my children because they're going to inherit this money one day. What can I do better than term deposits? But I don't want to take a lot of risk. If she had left the money in a term deposit, this blue line here shows what the cash rate will have done over that time. See how flat it was for years, and you can see how it's just starting to tick up a little bit now. That just shows the benefit of the interest rates that are going up, but it's still not really accelerating her growth. So we spent quite a bit of time talking around risk and what she would be comfortable with, around her time in life and things that could go wrong. She might need to go into a nursing home. And if she needs to go into a nursing home, where's she going to access money from? So we had a plan for everything. And then we decided to invest her money extremely secure. She's an older lady. She's not doing this because she needs to make money. She's doing it for the benefit of her children. She wants her children to have more money one day when she passes. So we invested the money, and this light blue line just shows you what her account has done over the time. I just jumped to the end. So from 2017 to now, 2023, that was just downloaded a couple of days ago, she's made 32%. She's so happy with that result because the difference was her having it in a term deposit. And so even though COVID came along and no one had a crystal ball, no one saw that coming. And of course the share market reacted quite quickly and there was quite a steep fall. But the market did actually recover within 12 months and then she started to make money again. Then this period here, if we can all recall the last 12 months, it's been a little bit ugly with the war, with inflation increasing, interest rates increasing, and it's just created volatility. So she's taking low risk, but we'll still see some volatility in her account, but she doesn't mind. She's in fact incredibly happy with the relationship we have because we've made her so much money over that time, taking not very much risk. So that's the idea of taking too much, taking not enough risk can be really impacting your plan, and that was the plan that she was on. Now back to that graph we were just looking at. So we've looked at this end of the spectrum. Now we're just going to jump up here. So really in this area. And we're just going to look at the Australian share market. So this is also a case where we see new client comes in and they say, all right, well, I've got my superannuation account. That's where I've held most of my wealth, but it's all invested in shares. There's no cash, there's no fixed interest. And that's what we would class on that risk spectrum as very, very high, which is fine if you've got, 10, 15 years before you plan to retire. But if you plan to retire within the next 5 years, that could be a dangerous strategy, and I'll show you why. So this is the Australian share market, and we're looking from the year 2000, and then that comes all the way along to almost where we are now, 2022. If you had $10,000 in the Australian share market at that time, and you held it all the way through, it'd be worth about $60,000 today. So it's multiplied 6 times over 22 years. So the result's great, but this is global financial crisis here. And this coloured section here is just showing us There was about a 12-month period that the market was declining. And then the light blue area was saying that we still didn't get to recovery really for about 10 years from there. So can you imagine you've got only shares in your portfolio, you come to 2008, you've been making bucket loads of money, and you think, well, this is the right strategy, I'm making so much money, why would I change? And then your wealth halves. If you retire at that point, that's a significant impact on your retirement plan. If you've got $1 million that turns into 500,000, you're probably going to continue working. And that's, you know, if you can relate to people you knew over that time, you would have probably heard people saying, I can't retire, I'm going to continue working. And that's the reason why. It's very likely that they were not paying attention to what they're invested in. They didn't have professional advice and they didn't have a plan. Maybe they had a plan, but they didn't know. They didn't have that information at hand as to how the money's actually invested and the impact that that can have on their wealth. So that's a great example of taking too much risk. And then some of the other things as well that I'll just point out is, yeah, cryptocurrencies and speculative shares. I talked about the speculative shares, you know, in that tech company example, but we see plenty of people doing that when they come in for a meeting with us, and more often than not, they've lost money doing it because someone at the pub said it was a good stock and it was going to do really well, or, you know, someone at work, there's always someone that gives a hot tip, and people are more readily to hand money into that for some reason, and it normally doesn't result well. Yeah, and they're the sorts of things that we would try to avoid in the portfolio. And if you want it, we'd say, look, put $100. Put whatever you can afford to lose into it, because it might double, but it might also turn to zero. And crypto we put in that same basket. So now we're going to turn to property. So another thing that we often see with people that are leading into retirement is that they've done a really great job of accumulating property. And property is a really great asset. It's a great asset for helping you grow wealth. The problem becomes when you come to retire, it's the cash flow that you can receive from the property. And, you know, for some people it doesn't matter because they've got lots of wealth outside of those properties and they'll use that wealth to fund the property. But for most, they need some cash flow. That's why they put the properties in the first place. They need some cash flow. So they're, you've probably heard this terminology before. They're asset rich, cash flow poor. You heard that?
My girlfriend and I say all the time, back in the day, I'm asset rich, but cash flow poor.
Yes. When you're working, it's fine because there's a tap that's turned on and there's money coming in. You turn that tap off and then the properties become a little bit of a problem. But it's not a problem because you make lots of wealth. You've got capital. We just now need to work the solution to give you cash flow, to resolve that cash flow issue. And so what we also find is a lot of people don't have the time to think about what those properties will look like when they retire. So I'm just going to give you a great example. I've got two examples here we're going to run through. So the first one is, will you assume that the value of the property is $1 million and there's no loans, they've paid it all off by the time they get to retire, and there's $750 a week rent coming in. So some people might argue that you get more rent in that property. I'm going to show you one that's not returning as much rent as others. Because sometimes we see this, particularly when a client's held a property for a really long time, they've got a relationship with the tenant and they like to leave the rent low. See it all the time with people that are in their 65s plus. Sounds about right as well. So we've run the scenario over here. So we've got the asset, the value of the asset. There's no loan in there, so we don't need to worry about any interest rates. But what we do have with the property is we normally pay someone to manage it. And it's typically around 8% of the rent that we receive. We typically need to pay for rates and sometimes some extra costs. We're going to say they're $3.5 grand a year. An older property that you've held for a long time is going to have a little bit more budget allocated for maintenance. So some years you might have to repair a kitchen or a bathroom, which are big expenses, and other years you'll have smaller expenses. So we'll just average that at about $3,200. You'll pay some accounting costs. We've said about $1,000 in insurance on the property at $1,200. So they're just some conservative numbers that we put together on that property. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah. Yep. We're going to assume that there's a tax rate of 35%. So if you're looking at that in your position, you might have a higher tax rate, you might have a lower tax rate. So that's just an assumption. So when we have a look at the rental income, well, we know there's $39,000 a year coming in rent. So you go, oh, that's excellent. That's a good amount of money. We probably need to allow for 2 weeks vacancies because we generally don't have tenants for a full 12 months. People tend to move more often these days. So when we take that out, there's about 37,500. Now we need to take out all of these expenses and they're all just listed here. So the cash flow before tax is $25,000. That's what's coming into your bank after you've paid all of these expenses. So that's just noted again down here. So it's about $500 a week. But then if we're using a tax rate of 35%, once you've paid any tax, you've got about $16,500. That's what you get to keep. That's what you get to spend for the year. You've got $1 million asset and you're earning $16,500 a year. If you're working, it does not matter at all. It becomes a problem when you retire because not many people, you need a lot of properties that are owned outright to give you enough income to be comfortable. Sounding.
Oh, you're taking that break for me.
No, it's fine. It's very different. Another assumption. So we've got a property worth $850,000, but the rent's $850,000. So some people would say that's a more likely scenario in today's environment because rents are really high. It's got all the same data and they're the same expenses, same cash rate. It's just now the rent's higher. So before you pay tax, you've got about $30,000 coming in for the year. But then once you pay tax, you've got about 19. So what it's illustrating is property is a great asset, but when it comes to cash flow, we need to be mindful of whether it's working for us best in retirement. Before I do that, I want to show you, and I'm sure you all know that property is a good asset when we hold it long term because it grows in value. I'll stand in front of the numbers. Does anyone want to give me a guess of what a property was worth in the year 2000? You can tell me Brisbane, Melbourne or Sydney, whichever area you're from. And I've got the answer behind me. The year 2000.
Then 100,000.
In which state?
Victoria.
Yeah.
South Australia.
Okay. It's a capital. Is that near the capital city?
That's near the Melbourne.
Near Melbourne. Okay.
40K.
14.
40.
2020.
Yeah, the year 2000.
Oh, it's 2000.
2000.
What kind of property?
Just a house. The house and a couple.
Bit more.
3 bedroom.
120.
Okay, we're going to get, and this, Ken, do you want to give us any hints? No. Okay, small print, but in Melbourne, the average price, so capital city, median house price, 191,000.
I was just a bit. Just a bit.
Yes, 287. Did you buy a property in that year?
Yeah. 200.
I look at the Brisbane price, 170, and I purchased a property in Brisbane just before that, and it was, yeah, really similar to that number, so.
Yes, I was already worse off because I had to pay all my stuff.
This is right, and here's the data from March last year of what these properties are worth. So before I showed you that graph of the Australian share market, and we looked at $10,000 and what that would be worth in 2022, and that was 60,000. If we look at these properties here and I do the calculation, I've already done the math, so I know the answers. In Brisbane, that's 5 times multiple. So in 22 years, it's doubled price 5 times from the starting price anyway. In Sydney, it's closer to 6 times, and I think Melbourne was it was between Brisbane and Sydney. So Sydney was definitely the better place to hold the property over that period of time. It's interesting because it may not always be the case that it's Sydney, but that's the power of property, and that's why people feel comfortable with property. And the thing with property is you can borrow money to invest very comfortably because you're not normally so much out of pocket. The debt, the loan. Use the bank's money to grow up. That's right.
That's what we were taught.
That's it. And it doesn't matter that it doesn't put money in your pocket. It's because you're working.
Yeah.
So it's just the problem when you stop working and then you go, okay, well, what income do I want to live? And that's what we're going to lead to next. So I'm not trying to say property is a bad asset at all. Property is a great asset. We're talking about retirement planning now. And that's that graph I showed you before, which just shows you the share market at the same period of time multiplied 6 times. So property, just to cover off, when you get to retirement, the problem is it's not a liquid asset. So you've got the $1 million and let's say you want to go on a holiday. You want to go overseas and it's going to cost 40,000 because you want to take the whole family with you. You can't go, I'm just going to sell a bedroom. It's just not liquid. You don't have as much flexibility with it, and there's some cash flow limitations. Yeah. So they're really the only two problems with the property. It's still going to grow in value. It's still going to be a great asset. So with that in mind, when we're talking about diversification, I want to go through this graph here, which looks incredibly busy, but normally when I explain it, people find it incredibly interesting and they only ask for a copy of this slide. So 1950 is down the bottom, and we've got every year along until the end of 2022. So you see at the top is the 2022 investment chart. So what we're looking at is if we're taking very little risk, like I was saying earlier with a client that had the term deposits, let's say you have $100, put it in a bank account, all the interest is going to pool in there. If you held that the whole way through until now, it'd be worth about 6,600.
From where?
1950.
1950, that's even before me. Jesus.
From your $100, that's what you would have. If your mother put that away for you, it would be So if you have $100 and you put it into the Australian share market, it's a dark blue line. So we're looking at two opposite sides of the spectrum. You have 307,000, the same investment, different asset class. If you've got long time, that's the sort of investments we want to help you make. And we've got a great seminar on that, how to build $2 million within 15 years. But today we're talking about retirement planning. So that's not where we really want to be holding all. Generally what we find is not where we want to hold most of our wealth. There's some other lines on here. So these are bonds. So bonds over the same period of time would have delivered about $17,000. And this is a balanced fund. So a balanced fund means, so if you've got super, you may be familiar with the term balanced fund. It generally means that 40% of your money, so let's say you've got $1 million, 400,000 is invested here, and 600,000 is invested up here, which gives us a balanced approach. It's generally what it means. So you're still going to be going up and down, but you're not taking too much risk. You're not taking, not enough risk. And you would have made it about 135 over the same period of time. But when we're talking shorter term, we look at dips in the market like global financial crisis that we looked at on the earlier graph. It didn't dip as long in the recovery. It was a lot quicker. And the same when we look at COVID and different events. So our job is to work with our clients and help them understand what risk they feel comfortable taking, but also what's appropriate given their time in life. To make sure the money's going to last and there's not going to be any storms, like you think about my scenario, hiking up in the mountains. There's not going to be a storm that comes along and pushes over your plan. Okay. So now let's get on to the tips. They're much nicer topic than traps. So having a plan. We're going to talk about having a plan, and we'll start there. Okay. We're talking about a plan. There's a question I always ask, and that question is, I'll ask you now, I won't ask you for the answer, but think about it in your mind. If you were retired today, you didn't have to worry about any debt, you own your own house, how much income would you want per week or per year to live? $2 grand? $2 grand a week? Yeah. Perfect. So you must have given a little bit of thought to that previously.
Oh, I've thought about it many times.
Yeah, excellent.
That would be okay for us.
Yeah.
Is there an average?
There is an average. Over the slide. Okay, this is an average run on couples, but I can give you the numbers on singles. And look, I can tell you, and I know what the numbers are on singles, but for a comfortable retirement for a couple, That's just increased because of inflation. You're now looking at about $70,000 a year. What does a comfortable lifestyle mean? Well, there is a definition over here, but basically what it means is you can afford private health. Wouldn't that be nice? If you had something go wrong, that you can go at the top of the queue and not the bottom of the queue. It means that you can go on some holidays. So you can jump on a plane and fly somewhere. It means you can run the air conditioner and the heater. Again, you wouldn't want that to be a luxury, like that to just be something that you can afford. That's what we're talking about, a comfortable lifestyle. A modest lifestyle is above the age pension, but you can still go on holidays. They're going to be very budget holidays, and they're probably going to be in Australia and not overseas. You'll still maybe run the heater or the air conditioner, but you'll be very careful with how you allocate money. That's kind of what we're looking at a modest lifestyle. And then the age pension, so if you were on a full Centrelink benefit, you'd be looking at about 42,000 for the year. So there's, 2,000? 2,000? That would be about 100 grand a year.
Oh,
So
So,
what's very comfortable? On your holiday, I want to fly in business.
oh, you want to go business class on your holiday?
I don't want to.
200,000.
Need to know.
You want to keep business.
I had a conversation with someone last night. I went to dinner with a travel agent. He's a retired travel agent.
I'm not in business class.
And some revolting figures were quoted. $30,000.
No way.
Okay, so if I want to fly business class, I would have a very comfortable.
I think Air New Zealand you could do 2 people for that price, but other flights.
Religion is just.
Don't quote me on that. I'm not a travel agent.
So how much? Very comfortable.
Very comfortable. Well, I can just relate to some of our clients. When I see them living off $120,000 a year, they're able to go on trips overseas. They're able to, basically, they're not worried about money. They're able to help their kids.
All you need to do is put very good.
Yeah. That's right. That was that.
Double that.
So you get 4,000 a week. Maybe 5,000 a week. No, maybe what you're going to
It's too much.
business class. How many times you going to?
I don't know, what's the helpers?
Tell me.
How much money do you need a week?
I have some clients that have very, fine tastes, and they believe they need $300,000 to $400,000 a year. They are traveling business class multiple times in the year. They're buying new cars often. That is living a very, very, very comfortable life.
Okay, good, that just gives us the perspective.
Yeah, perspective from one end of the spectrum to the
Yeah.
other. So how much capital would you need to give you that income? So that's part of the planning process that we take clients through. And we've just got a few examples here. So if you wanted $100,000 a week, $2,000, sorry,
2,000 a week, yeah.
you know what I meant? Not 100.
Yeah.
Lucky you know what I mean, not what I'm saying.
You have to spend it. That's the whole thing. I would not be able to spend that amount of money each week.
2,000.
No, which is 100,000.
Yeah. No. So in today's dollars, you need about $1.8 million. So if you said to me today, sitting here, I would like $100,000 a year, I would say, okay, we need $1.8 million and we can achieve that. But if you saying, well, I'm going to retire in 5 years from now, I now know you need more money because cost of goods go up. So to give you $60,000 in 5 years' time, or equivalent, you'll need 1.25. And you can see all of the other numbers. There. So if you don't meet the numbers that we have in front of you, it doesn't mean you can't retire. This is the scenario if you want to be completely self-funded and not have to worry about government monies. This is the position we try to get our clients to when we've been working with them a long time. And we've seen many clients now do that over the time, but you do need time on your side. If you're a bit later in life, it's okay. We're going to talk about some other strategies that are going to help you.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
So, for example, you need 100,000 a year, you have $1.8 million. How many years are you living?
Oh, I have that over the page, Linda.
I'm sorry.
I do. I knew you could have that question. I knew everybody would have that question. It's right here. Okay, this is a $60,000 a year though one, but all the other scenarios will work exactly the same, because they all work exactly the same. Let's just leave it. Okay, Mike, he's 65. He owns his own house, and we asked Mike, do you ever plan to move out of this house? And he said, no, I love this house. I want to die in this house if I can.
I get sick and tired of hearing
I
that.
hear it all the time. That's why I hate this example. I'm just using typical conversations we have with clients. It's funny because you're
Yeah, I'm quite happy to move on.
happy to. Okay, so Mike actually has a 1.25 and he wants $60,000 a year. That's what he said. He's a single, and he says that will give me comfortable. That will give me comfortable. We're going to assume that he earns a 6% return after fees. So, 6% return after fees and 3% inflation. One thing I want to point out, remember the example with the property. If he had a property worth $1 million, we know that he can't live off $60,000 a year. We've done the cash flow. Even if he was getting bucket loads of rent.
You forgot the body corpus, don't you?
I assume there was no body corporate.
Well,
You have,
the body corpus.
you have body corporate, your profit just went down. Maybe you've got $10,000 surplus out of the property if you had the body corporate. Yeah, I have a property in Brisbane that has a body corporate and I pay $6,600 a year in body corporate fees. Yeah. It's a house in a body corporate, so it's a bit different. So that's why I pay the body corporate, but it's a ridiculous cost to the cash flow. It's okay because I'm working. If I was retired, I'd probably question that. Okay, so this just shows how long the money will last. And if he's 65, that money will last 33 years, will be almost 100. He should be quite happy. In fact, we know Mike is quite happy with that plan because the money will continue to increase for about 10 to 15 years, and then it will taper off. But the thing we know with Mike as well is that he's probably not going to keep increasing his withdrawal $60,000 or more as he gets older. He'll do that probably for the first 10 to 15 years, and then he'll stop traveling, and then he'll maybe have some more medical costs, but they won't be as much as what he was allocating to travel. So in fact, that graph will look a lot smoother. So that's the ideal position we want to help clients get to. And if you don't get there, that's okay. There's another plan. There's another plan. There's other strategies. So the other strategies are, we'll look at tax minimization. A lot of words on this page because there's so many different strategies. We're just going to look at the typical strategies we'll work with the clients to help them minimize tax. First one we're going to do is the contributions into super. Because super is once you're retired, you pay zero tax in the fund, unless the rules change. But right now, that's the rules. You can't get better than zero tax. There is no other scheme that's zero tax. So we want to maximise $27,500. That'll be between employer contributions and any contributions you put in. The maximum we can put in at the moment is $27,500 per person. And then if you've got more cash flow on top of that, you've got a strong income, we might even look up to $110,000 extra on top of that. There's no tax deduction with this though. The tax benefit is when you retire that you don't pay any tax then on the earnings. So they're just really smart tax strategies. The other thing we might talk about, well, Mike didn't want to sell his house, but other clients do because they've got a 4 or 5 bedroomed house that they were raising a family in, and now it's just 2 people in the house, and they say, I'm quite happy to downsize. I want to live in a unit so I can lock it up and go away on holidays, things like that we hear. So they might say, I'm going to downsize the house. If you're over 55 and you've owned the house for a minimum of 10 years, so more than 10 years you've owned that house, there's a rule, it's called the downsizer contribution rule, where the government will now let you put individually, so if it's owned jointly, you can both put $300,000 in each into super, as long as you do it. There's a few rules, so if you're going to do it, don't take this as gospel. Get professional advice to make sure it works properly. But it's a really great way of getting more money into super. So the tax benefit doesn't come from the $300,000. The tax benefit comes because you've got it now in an environment paying zero tax. Another rule or another option to think about. So if we often will see people that have, and we will have helped them accumulate properties during their working life. Great assets, help them grow, lots of wealth because they're using banks' money to do it. But now there's a cash flow problem. We need to give a lot of thought to when we're going to sell those properties because we don't want to be paying capital gains tax unnecessarily. So just a big consideration. You know, we've seen clients that haven't really given consideration to that, but it's too late once you sell the property. So we like to analyse all of that before you actually do dispose of the property. The other thing as well that we'll look at with tax minimisation, it's not called death tax, but I've listed it here as death tax because when I have conversations with clients, that's what they'll call it. So I'm going to use language that you understand. So, and we were having this conversation earlier as we're having some little nibbles, and we're talking about the principal place of residence. Do you pay tax on that? No, the kids won't pay tax on that. If you've got investment properties, yes, the kids will pay tax on that just as you would have paid tax on it. They might pay more tax than you though, because you're retired and they're working. So their marginal tax rate might be 40 cents in the dollar, 47 cents in the dollar when they sell it.
So would you be better off selling all your investment properties before we die?
If you have the crystal ball and you know you're going to die, yes.
I think that would make me do that.
Unless the kids plan to hold that property and not sell
So
it.
they're going to have to pay tax on it.
Yeah, so we do have some clients that say, I'm not going to, like they're older, they're 80 and they're saying, no, I'm going to hold the property because this property is on Stradbroke Island and it's the kids are always going to come and go from there, but they're not going to sell the property. Most people do sell the property when someone dies, that's generally what
They'll fight it.
So I tell you,
You've got kids? You've got kids?
No, but I know that you should spend it on before you die. It's not good. And I say that as a child. So
you want your parents, that's
I
right.
want my parents to spend every last.
Are they going to?
I'm working on them and having a hard time
Are they really?
because,
Hard
we have to, that's not the thing that people have done in history.
No,
They would do
exactly
that
the
later.
problem. Yeah.
And I just, if they're gonna be dead, I'll just feel so bad that to have the best in life.
Yeah, that's true.
So, anyway.
That's right. So yeah, one of the things that we want to consider is death tax, and it's really around the sale of the property, the investment property, not the principal place of residence, and superannuation. People always are blindsided by the tax on superannuation. So your spouse doesn't pay any tax on receiving, let's say you got $1 million in super. You die, spouse receives it because they're the beneficiary, no tax. But when they die, when the last surviving partner of the relationship dies, normally it would go to your children. That's normally what people do. Their dependent children, because they're grown up, they have to pay tax on the taxable component in the fund. So again, lots of people don't know that there's different components in your fund. So every time you contribute money in and you get a tax benefit, so that's your employer putting money in, that's you putting money in, every time you claim a tax benefit, someone has to pay tax later when they receive it. So I had a client in here last week, and unfortunately had a brother die, and he received the money, and his mum was sitting in the meeting as well, and his mum said, "He paid half of the money in tax. How can I make sure that my son that's sitting beside me doesn't pay the same amount of tax?" And we did a quick calculation, and it was somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 he was going to pay in tax when she dies. So there's some strategies we can do to work around that, depending on your age. Whoops. I'm talking too much. Sorry. The answer's coming. Suspense. Yeah, how can I make sure that he doesn't have to pay so much money in tax? Now, depending on your age, there's this strategy called a re-contribution strategy. So this is something we always work with our clients before they get to an age that you're allowed to put more money into super. The way that it generally works is once you retire, in your 60s, normally people are going to do that, and you can do a withdrawal then from your super account. If you're under a certain age, you can then contribute it back in. There's rules on how much you can and can't, but when you do that, it cleanses the tax. And so in his scenario, I worked a strategy because his mum's going to downsize the house, that she can contribute 300,000 into super, she can withdraw 300,000, and he'll then pay no tax. We just save him between $50,000 and $100,000 in tax. We don't know when, because it depends when his mum dies, but he would have paid that. The other way of avoiding it is, again, we've seen this happen before, is when someone's terminally ill, then you do have a bit of a crystal ball on when things are going to end, and you can withdraw the money from super. You withdraw it from super, and then you don't pay tax.
Who withdraws it? The child,
The client,
and they're
because they're alive.
And then they're alive,
And then they can put it in the bank account. No tax.
and the person, the parent hasn't died yet.
I know, and you save a whole lot of money.
The parent hasn't died. They can take the money out for themselves.
For themselves and put it in the bank account in there.
So then their income, their interest on that money will be taxed.
Yes. So you want to keep it in the super environment for as long as possible because you're not paying any tax. But then if you know you're going to die, you don't, depending on your components, everyone's components are different. But then you might want to take it out of super. Yeah, if you know you're going to die. So we do work with clients on that strategy, but it's something to be mindful of. And I think that's why you're here tonight. So you're learning some things you didn't know about, and that one really blindsides people. Yeah. No, don't. Yeah. And then the other one is inheritance. So we've seen clients inherit money. And when they inherit parcels of shares, so with certain parcels of shares, it might be a Commonwealth Bank share. We see that often because Commonwealth Bank's been around for such a long time. Normally in someone's portfolio, if they have a share portfolio, or it might be a BHP stock. If you inherit that asset, it's the same as property that I was talking about before. The person that inherits it has to pay the tax on it. So one way that we get around some really clever tax minimisation strategies is what we call it, it's a really funny term. It's called an in-specie transfer. Has anyone heard that terminology? That's the legal name. Basically, what we do is we take your parcel of shares that you've inherited, and it's a contribution into your super. It's called an in-specie transfer, and you get a tax benefit on the way if you put it under that contribution. It's really tricky. I wouldn't recommend doing it yourself, but just know to come and speak to a professional if you've received an inheritance of shares, or you know someone else that has, because there's another thing you wouldn't know, and you'd be paying tax unnecessarily.
What about inheritance? Cash.
Cash? Yeah, that helps. So now that you've got all that wonderful information about tax minimisations and little intricate strategies, we're going to talk about this transition to retirement. Has anyone heard that terminology used?
Oh, kind of, yeah.
Does it make sense to anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
How do you do it?
You know how you do it?
How
Good.
do you do it?
I will show you. I'm going to show you how you do it, and hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. The first thing I just want to point out is a transition to retirement strategy. It lets you access some of your super while you're still working. So it's ideally a structure that you set up when you're still working. And it's going to benefit you in one of these two scenarios. So the first scenario, it's going to, if you want to wind back on your hours at work, so you, instead of working 40 hours a week, you want to work 30 hours a week, you can find that top up through the transition to retirement. So you've got enough income that you're not reducing your income, even though you're working less. The other way that people use it is to boost their super. So it's a strategy that can enable you more flexibility with work, or it's a strategy that can help you put away more money. I'll show you how it works. Okay. This is a scenario that you'd be very familiar with. You earn a salary, let's call it 100 grand a year. You receive part of that salary. Some of it goes to super, and then some of it goes to expenses. Kind of how it works. Then we look at a transition to retirement strategy. So without the salary, let's assume you weren't doing the salary sacrifice before. You receive it, some goes into super, the rest goes to you. What a transition to retirement strategy enables you to do is you contribute part of your salary now to super. So it goes into super, then part of your super gets transferred over into a pension. And so now we've got two accounts. We've got a super account and we've got a pension account. This pension account now pays you an income. So you can't take an income from a super account, but you can take an income from a pension account.
Is it in the same structure as the super? Is it-
Yeah, exactly. It's just called the super account and a pension account. It's like a different bank account, like a everyday rewards account and a trading account.
Why do they do that? Why don't they just keep it as your super to keep it simple? Then you've got to move it over there and then you get on changes.
Then you wouldn't need it. Then you wouldn't even need it. I'll be set it up.
Yeah, that just seems crazy. They have got to shift it out.
I think it's so they understand how they tax you, because this is a tax-free environment, that's a taxed environment. This is a 15% tax, it is a zero tax, like if we just talk basically.
And they let you do that.
Yeah, from age 59, that's, so it was from 55, but as years go on, they've transitioned that out. Currently at CP 59, you can start this strategy. But from next year, it'll be 60 if you're under 60 and above. They're always making it.
Yeah, they change the rules, don't they?
That's it. So there's so many rules that go through our mind when we talk about different strategies, and as you can see, that's why we want to say you really need professional advice. You can have a plan, you can have a bit of an idea what you want, but you really need professional advice because there's so many different things, particularly when we're talking about retirement planning, that you can easily blow up money, not even realising.
Yeah.
So yeah, that pension then pays you an income, so then you still need your living expenses, but now you've got an income coming from two sources. Why do you do it? Because you save tax. Got an example, lots of words on this paper. So I'll take you through the example. Jill, she's 59. She's got 100 grand a year income. So we know she's going to pay 34.5 cents in the dollar tax. She's got two, we're just going to say she's got a small balance, 200 grand in super. So we're now not talking about the $1 million people, we're talking about the people who weren't able to put a lot of money away earlier in life, but they really want to boost their retirement savings. They realise that they're getting closer to retirement and they boost it. And she says, I want to keep working until I'm about 65. So we've got a bit of time on our side, and we've got like, 6 years. So we go, okay, let's do a transition to retirement strategy. We know your employer's putting in 10.5% of the 100,000. That's just what the employers do if you're an employee. And we can now salary sacrifice 17,000 into super. That's going to keep her in that cap. Remember we talked about a cap of 27? So the employer's putting in the rest to take her up to 27. Yep, we're following, everyone's following. So this automatically, by putting this into super, it reduces her tax because this is taxed. That 17 is taxed at 15%. Whereas before she was paying 34.5 cents. So 17 grand now is being taxed at a much lower rate. So now you can kind of see the benefit. Yeah, so but now she's got less take home pay, right? She's got 17,000 less than she had before, and she's a bit worried because she couldn't afford to do that. So the difference comes from her super. So we take 200,000 from a super and we put it into what we call a transition to retirement pension account. And there's a few rules. There's rules with everything. She's allowed to take. She has to take income. She can't say I don't want any income. It has to pay an income. It has to pay somewhere between 2 and 10%. That's the current rules. That will change next year. But she needs to take somewhere between $4,000 and $20,000 a year. So to maintain her current income, she needs to withdraw $11,000 a year from that 200. So that's within these limits. So that works. And yeah, she's going to pay a little bit of tax because of her age, but she's in a much better tax position. So I haven't got the numbers there of how much money she saves, but I'm going to show you over the page. Does everyone follow that scenario? Yeah, it's a bit complicated transition to retirement. But here's the example, just the numbers. So we talked about a $17,000 a year salary sacrifice. That's $327 a week. Suggested income drawdown, she needs to withdraw $11,000 down to make sure she's got enough money to live. So she was previously getting $75,000 to live, which is $1,400. So the way she's, yeah, that's what she was receiving, and that's what she now will receive with this strategy. What she's saved is actually $3,000 tax. So she doesn't have to come up with a cent. It's simply a strategy that's out there that you can use. So transition to retirement is, something that you should consider if you're in that age group. If you're already putting in the maximum contributions into super, $27,500, it probably doesn't work for you, but by all means, come and have a chat with us and we can,
So is that going to boost her super account?
yeah, that $3,000, she could spend it. But the reason she's come to see us is so we can help her put more of that back into it.
So she'll put an additional 3,000.
That's right, every year for the next 6 years. Yeah, and that would probably grow because her income normally get more pay rises. Okay, the final bit that I want to talk about now is Centrelink. So a few of the tips with Centrelink, one thing that people don't realise is how important it is to get your application in if you do qualify. If you don't get your application in, they're not going to back pay you, even though you're entitled to it. They don't care. So first tip, if you qualify, get that application in early. This is another really quite interesting strategy that we help clients with. Has everyone heard of JobSeeker? JobSeeker.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Wasn't the robot, was it?
Yeah, I know. Sounds that way, doesn't it? They came out with that terminology during COVID, but basically it's like the New Start payments. It's a payment that the government will give you if you're not working. So let's look at a scenario. Actually, I've got a scenario of the pay. So there's this mutual obligations rule that if you're over 55 and you need an income and asset test, and then you're working 30 hours a fortnight with a combination of paid and voluntary work, you qualify for this JobSeeker payment. If you qualify for that, it just means you get money from the government at that time. So sometimes people get made redundant and it's outside of the ball's out of their court and they can't work anymore, and it's really hard to get employed when you're that age, from what I hear from clients. And sometimes it's a health issue, but it's not enough that you go on a disability pension. But, I've had some clients that have had some workplace bullying, that they haven't been able to go back to work. I guess they've been bullied out because of their age. I've had other clients that have hurt their backs. There's all sorts of things that will put you in a position when you're kind of 55 and older, you can't go back to work. So there's these really great strategies, because what a lot of people think is that they need to access their super then. They need to start living with their super. And they get quite depressed going, well, I'm going to run out of money really quickly because now I'm retired a whole lot sooner than I ever planned. And then it gets better if you're 60 and older. This mutual obligation just says you need to do 30 hours per fortnight, so that's just 15 hours a week, of approved work at a voluntary place. So what that is there's a Salvation Army around the corner. They're an approved voluntary workplace. If you donate 15 hours of your time each week and you're 60 and older, the government will give you the JobSeeker payment, providing you've got no other income, providing you meet the asset and income test.
Wow,
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. The big thing that I want to point out here is super is not tested when you're receiving a JobSeeker payment. So when you're below age 67, you can't access the age pension. If you leave all your money in the superannuation environment, that's where you hold most of your wealth, you'll access this money. So we've seen some clients that have enough wealth that when they get to 67, they won't get a pension, they won't get a government pension. But we can give them a 100% JobSeeker payment in the lead up to that by leaving their money in superannuation. So I'll give you an example. Examples are good, it helps you follow the information. So we've got a lady here that's 62. She's single with no children. That's important because if you've got an income or you've got a spouse, it will change everything. So in this scenario, she has 600,000 in super.
Well, where did she get that from?
Maybe it was an inheritance.
I was going to say, I've got girlfriends and cousins, and there's no way, because of being a woman and super, there's no way they even got anywhere near these.
She had a husband.
Oh, I don't ask them, but I know it's nowhere near the 600,000, so that becomes a problem to start with.
This is examples of clients that we've been working with for many years. So I'm thinking of one right now. I had a review meeting with her just recently. She asked me to have a look when we first met and what her wealth was, because she's looking at retiring now. Again, at a younger age. This isn't her scenario, but she's probably around that age. And she was, I can't remember her age, but at the time it was 2008. And she had an income of about $60,000 a year and a super balance of $140,000.
Yeah.
We did a lot of work together. She now has about $1 million in super. 2008, we started working together.
How did you do that?
All the strategies we're talking about today and some of the other strategies we're not talking about today that we've. We talked to her about investment property, but believe it or not, she didn't buy an investment property. She didn't. No, she didn't. We just contributed more money into super, so that was a more comfortable position for her. So we minimised massive amounts of tax. She was able to pool that back into super. She owns her own house. Yeah, she's comfortable. So this position really is very similar to hers. We haven't downsized the house yet either. So that's another strategy we'll be looking at for her. But this family house is worth $950,000. Motor vehicles are $10,000, contents $5,000, and she's got $3,000 in the bank. So she's just been made redundant. And she said, I have no option. I'm 62. No one's going to employ me. I don't even want to go and look for a job. I'm so depressed that I've been made redundant. I'm going to have to start drawing on the 600,000. And she's saying, well, I'm so upset about that because now I'm going to run out of money early. And you know, that's the scenario. So we said, okay, there's this strategy we can do for you. Rather than putting this into a pension account, because if we put that 600,000 into a pension account, you're going to get zero from Centrelink. You've got too much asset. But if we leave it in a super account, they don't test that asset. They don't test it at all for her age group. So she's able to now access $700 a fortnight. And what does she need to do for that? She needs to do 15 hours a week, approved work at voluntary place. She's loving it because she can work somewhere that she loves. For the first time in her life, she can do something that she loves because there's so many different voluntary, you just have a look out in the streets. How many people are crying out for help, and you're not going to get paid for it, but you'll access these benefits until you're 67, and then you need to qualify for Centrelink. If you don't qualify for Centrelink, well, that turns off, and then you start drawing on your money.
But like you're 67, my cousin's 67 this year.
Yeah.
She has nowhere near that amount in her super account. I know that. Her family home isn't worth that much, but she's still trying to work. So she could probably do
that.
job seeker.
Yeah.
And volunteer.
Probably without knowing her situation, she could probably access up to $700 a week from Centrelink if she only owns a family home and minimal other assets.
She doesn't own it. She doesn't own it yet.
Yeah. Yes, I think she would qualify for.
And will she have to eventually pay this back to the?
No.
They're not going to come after we won't go. We paid you too much.
But I didn't tell her to have a conversation with us. So
She's back in Melbourne, but
we can do it on a video conference.
Yeah.
We do have lots of people.
because she's struggling to work. She's struggling.
And that's what we hear often. These are the conversations we have with people all the time. And they're just strategies that are available that people don't know about. Yeah. But as soon as you put that in a pension account, then you're going to be asset tested and you probably won't need the asset test. Yeah. Aren't you glad you came along?
Yeah, I can help a few more people.
That's right. So that pretty well concludes what we're going to talk about. So live your life by design. Make sure you plan, you prepare, you take action, but most importantly, you receive the professional advice because this is way too complicated. Like, yes, it's a free seminar, but this is way too complicated for you to do yourself to do properly. You really need to make an appointment with us. And we'll help you and we'll save you lots of money and it'll be worth the fee you pay. So next steps are book a complimentary meeting with us if you haven't already. And I can have one of our specialists sit down with you, analyse your position, and if you can't do anything, we'll tell you, but it's probably likely we can help. We do have some other seminars that we're running. We don't have dates booked in for them, so we've just done a really intensive 5-week program. But the seminars that we've run, like today, was tips and traps for your retirement plan. We also have one on money mastery. As I mentioned, how to build $2 million in 15 years. Wealth mastery, so you can learn all about different types of asset classes. And then as Linda was mentioning, die with zero. So it's an interesting concept.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Zero.
And you can
No
really,
problems with
yes,
that.
that's right. But it's also the concept that if you want to leave money for the kids, most people do, allocate it early.
Yeah.
And then live the life you want.
Yeah, yeah,
And so you can see what you do with it.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Die, I won't see nothing.
You want to get the benefit of that. You can see the smile on their face if you give it to them while you're alive.
Want to do that job?
So we do other areas as well, like we've talked about retirement planning, but we do help people accumulate wealth. We deal with lots of different people, depending at different times in their life. Could be just straight investment advice, like I've got a bucket of money that I need to invest. Could be you sold a business or you've inherited some money. Yeah, lots of different things. So anything wealth related, come and have a talk to us because I'm sure that we'll be able to help. If we can't, we're going to point you in the right direction. So thank you very much for coming along tonight. Yes, good. Any questions? We asked a lot of questions as we went through.
Yeah, that's right.
Very good, thank you.
Excellent, thanks. And anyone online, if you do have any questions, feel free to just write it in the comment box. I know we've got Hayley and Florentina on there that will bring the questions in to me. So if you've got any, type them up or keep them for us later and we can have a chat about them individually. Thanks for coming along. Excellent.
Excellent, no, that was brilliant, brilliant.
Good. Good information.
Very good information, yeah, very good.
So we'll be running this again. So if you've got some friends all around different places in Australia, they can just video in from anywhere. Just take a computer.
So those that couldn't see it, how do they get to see it?
They're watching right now. They can
Yeah,
actually see me.
later on, those that
Oh,
didn't see it.
we've got this recorded. This whole seminar was recorded, so we can we'll send you the recording and you can distribute it to whoever you think would like to have a listen.
That other thing about job seeking.